think the time is correct, and it's time to call this working session of the Garrard County School Board meeting to order. And the first order on our agenda is a moment of silence. Okay, next order. In order to see, please, flag, all stand, please. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right, moving right along. Our next item on the agenda is to adopt the agenda. Do I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Brian makes a motion to adopt the agenda. Mr. Hurt, second of that motion. Have any comments? Any changes? If not, call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? All were in favor. Now I'd like to turn this over to our superintendent.
All right.
Let him introduce the next item, number 2 on the agenda.
Right, today you have an update from Sherman Carter Barnhart, and Kevin Cheek is here to share with you today. So, Kevin.
All right, just to bring everybody up to date where we are. Earlier last week, we had a pre-bid meeting, and it was a virtual pre-bid meeting in this new COVID age. So we went through all the bidding requirements with bidders at that time. And at this point, what we've done is we've made phone calls to all the plan holders. Lynn Blueprint is distributing plans. And from Lynn Blueprint, we can tell how many people are holding the front plans. And on Camp Dick, with the bus canopy, we've got 5 total contractors holding the plans. 2 of those have said that they're definitely bidding, and there is 1 no and 1 maybe. So in addition to that, we made some phone calls to some other contractors today to see if they were not aware or if they're going to change their mind and decide to look at it. So right now, we got a total of 5. What we've seen in the past is if you've got 5, probably you get 2 on bid day. So we're hoping to get more, but it's a small job, and I can understand that. These 2 contractors, both of them we know, and we have no issues with approving either one of them at this time. The intercom was a little bit different. We had 12 different plan holders on the intercom system, and 5 of those have said yes, and she's still trying to get a hold of the others. So we've got much more interest because that's electrical contractors, specialty contractors coming in, putting in that intercom system. And that's the intercom system for the high school. The price contract for the high school that we had, the direct price contract on it for all the exterior openings, they have submitted their final paperwork, and it's at our office. And once we get all the other bids, we'll be able to review everything together as a package for the whole. The bid opening for the Camp Dick canopy and the intercom system is going to be held on the 17th at 2 p.m. So your board meeting is it that evening, or that's that evening? I'll be here at 2 o'clock. We'll do a digital bid opening. I may come over and get with you. Maybe I set up somewhere in an office, or we may do it digitally out of my office and allow the logins. Either way, we will be here to give you an update that evening, one way or the other, to let you know where the numbers are, where they fall in. Hopefully be able to give you a recommendation of award. We'll have to get the paperwork together following up that recommendation of award. So we'll see where we're at that point and get all those numbers together for you. So with that, is there anything that you might have questions on regarding the projects?
You mentioned a while ago the high school. Did you mean the middle school?
I'm sorry, I'm still living in 1985.
No, that's okay.
Yes, it's the middle school. The middle school exterior doors and the intercom.
Any other questions?
Any other comments?
Kevin, thank you.
All right.
Appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you Thursday.
All right.
Next up is the energy savings report from Performance Services. And we have Mike Lindsay, David Dowdell with us, and then I get to meet somebody new tonight.
Yeah, this is Bart Stern. He's our engineer that worked on the project, so.
We'll turn it over to Performance Services.
Do you already have a copy, or do you need a copy of our presentation?
Yeah, we
They don't have the presentation, but they have the big report.
Right, this is what we're gonna cover. It's just kind of an overview of the report, and then, as you saw that report, that report's pretty lengthy, so. See. All right. Mike. Sure. Okay.
So good evening. Hope it's okay if I take my mask off to speak, because I sometimes muffled when I'm talking normally, so when I put a mask on it gives difficulties. That's what my wife and kids tend to tell me. So you've got a copy of the report. I'm just going to go through that real quickly for you. We talked about this a few months ago on where you were tentatively. If you looked at the first slide after that picture slide, you get to the annual guaranteed savings of a little over $104,000. Our measured and verified savings is over $150,000, which is about 45% greater than what we had expected the project to deliver. We're excited about that. I think that's a great result. A lot of that has to do with the work you did in the project. A lot of it has to do with your staff's diligence to make sure that they maximize the benefits of those projects. And so that's a good result. And again, that's something, I think we expected that. We talked about that before, but we don't see this often. Usually we're 10 to 15% greater is what we kind of expect, because we estimate and guarantee those things low so that we make sure we exceed all our guarantees. This is a really successful project. Yes, sir.
Let me interject this. How much of that do you think was due to the fact that we've closed down?
This is just on, so when we do the measured and verified, I'll look at the utility bills later. The utility bill saving is actually greater than that due to the being closed down. So when we do a measured and verified report, we look at the equipment itself, and we're really measuring the efficiency before versus the efficiency after, and taking that times the run time. So we accounted for what the normal operation would be of lighting and equipment. So you would have gotten that savings in this number, even if you're in school. And your actual number is even greater than that, because your use was down significantly March, April, May, of course. And we'll get to that here in a little bit in a moment. But that's a great question. So we try to isolate what's the savings from the equipment, so that we're not taking advantage of those things, or vice versa, getting penalized sometimes. If you have a really harsh winter, the weather kind of affects your usage to be higher than what you would expect. And so we correct those things in the calculations and in that report. So. Look at the next slide. It's just a quick summary of the work completed. As far as the project itself, quite a bit of lighting work was done, quite a bit of HVAC work was done. We have water conservation, as well as some significant HVAC upgrades at this building, tech center, and middle school. I'll keep rolling on. My next slide just talks about when we approach these projects, and this is one thing we talk about a lot with all of our customers. We do it from an energy perspective. We also do it from a learning environment perspective. So the idea is not to make your buildings more efficient by giving you dark and cold or overheated rooms. It's to give the right light level, the right sound level, and a comfortable space. And I'll get more into that here in a moment as we talk about how the Energy Star process works and where we kind of go with that maybe someday. But we really design systems for a great learning environment and to be efficient. And one of the things we do as part of those projects, and folks on my staff do this, when the project was complete, we go in and take samples in multiple classrooms, multiple spaces throughout the district. So we have readings to confirm to us that the temperature, the humidity, the CO2 levels, ventilation levels are all what we expect. Our handheld readings match what the control system is doing. And so we know we've delivered an efficient system, and it's giving you a great learning environment. You go to the next slide, it gets into the financial impact of the project. And we talked about this a little bit last time as well. But a base year, when we first started this project, your base year was actually set at 2014-15. And I think at that time you explored different options on energy project with an RFP. By the time we were selected and got the work installed, here we are a few years later before we get to the installation and then the project done. But back at that time, you spent right over $600,000 on utilities. Or on energy as far as natural gas and electricity. And so I took that, and if we applied the rate increase you've seen over the last 5 years, which has been kind of incredible, but we talked about this last time, it's almost 6% a year you've seen your rate to go up. And so had you not done anything this past year, you would have spent over $700,000 on that same energy that you would have bought 5 years ago. You actually spent just a little over $500,000. So by doing that project, you actually avoided spending another $207,000 that you would have spent had you just been buildings to stay the same over that 5-year period. And we're seeing this all across the country as far as the rate increases. We're in Indiana and a lot of the Midwest, we're seeing you were really dependent on coal for your electricity. So electricity rates have gone up quite a bit. You probably see that at your utility bill at home. And oftentimes the base rates increase. Then you'll see, depends on who your utility is, oftentimes they'll list on there where the different items that make up that bill. They've got their base rate, then they have a fuel factor. And so the base rate could be only up a few percentage points, and that fuel factor could go up significantly. And that's what we're seeing as we've kind of been regulated and forced away from as much dependent on coal here in the Midwest. Our rates are still really good, but the gap between higher rate states and lower rate states in the Midwest is closing. And that's all because of just a ton of regulation put on coal, a lot of demands for renewable energy and those kind of things from the utility companies. A lot of the utility companies were mandated to change their source of energy. So a number of them have put up wind turbines. You've seen different places, probably a lot of solar systems that are owned by the utility because they've been mandated to change their source of energy. So that just drives that investment. They try and pass that investment on to their customers. So that's why we've seen that rate increase. And I think we're going to see that continue. I think last year, rate increase requests we saw anywhere from 12 to 18% over a 3-year period. Again, that's just at the base rate, then that fuel factor is going to kick in depending on where it's at. So, Garrard, you had a question on that?
Yes, I did. What do you see, you brought up renewable energy and mandates against fossil fuels and coal. What, I understand that the cost is higher and that's driving the cost up. But the big concern is, can renewable energy supply enough energy to meet the need? How do you see that?
So I'll give you my personal opinion. This isn't the official opinion of Performance Services. It's got to be a mix from what I'm seeing, because there's systems out there aren't completely reliable. Obviously, the wind's going to stop blowing, the sun's not going to be shining, so we need to have a mix of both. And that's what we're transitioning to, especially in the Midwest. But again, it's been mandated, so that investment, the utilities have to make that either way, and they're, for the most part, working on a cost-plus basis in the Midwest because we're not deregulated. And so they go to the Regulation Commission and say, here's my costs, and they negotiate their new rate, and we pay that, whatever that is. So we're still paying great rates in terms of compared to the rest of the country, but they're creeping up significantly. But I think
I was speaking of brownouts and
yes,
like that.
Yeah,
States that are mandated.
States that are doing that, you're seeing that effect.
Yes.
So yeah, and when we work in Texas and all over the places of the country, so we see different things like that happen. So it really needs to be a mix, and that's in my commercial opinion. I do a lot of research on this, do a lot of talks about the different energies conferences and kind of thing about that. And I'm trying to kind of middle of the road, and we need to get towards some renewable, but we also need to not realize that that's not the end all either. That makes sense.
Thank you, sir.
Back to my presentation, I'll get off my soapbox a little bit. So anyway, that's the impact energy-wise you've seen. And the next slide I've got there is talks about Energy Star. And I want to talk about that briefly, and so I can kind of give a comparison on how your buildings have changed. And you'll see the energy use intensity and how things have changed in your buildings. So Energy Star is an EPA-sponsored program. You probably see that little blue logo on electronics you buy, and basically it means it's been peer-reviewed, that it's an efficient piece of equipment, and it meets certain standards. Well, buildings can do the same thing in schools. I don't think you've ever certified any of your buildings, but you've got quite a few that could. But part of that process is you have to meet energy standards, and you also have to meet those learning environment standards I talked about earlier. So one of our goals is to get all of our projects, all the schools we work in, Energy Star certified, because it's a third-party review that says it's efficient and you provide a great learning environment. Now, the negative part of that is, to prove that learning environment, we have to go in classrooms, typically about 40% of the rooms in a building, and take those readings with students there. And so we've kind of put a pause on that. We have actually over almost 198 buildings that we have we're paused on because either the kids aren't in the buildings, or it's really not probably appropriate for us to go in classrooms right now. And we're getting that answer from pretty much everybody. I think I asked your superintendent the same thing. It makes complete sense. I wasn't surprised at the answer. But at some point in time, if we ever get back to where it's somewhat normal, we would like to go through it and do those readings. We'll submit the energy data to the EPA. We'll submit those readings in the classrooms and get your building certified Energy Star. And like I said, again, it's a pretty significant achievement. And what really that means is you're the top 25th percentile of all buildings in the United States, K-12 buildings, and they segregate based on elementary, middle school, high school, and those kind of things. We're trying to figure out how we get the education center certified, because it's really an educational building, but it's not high school, middle school, and so we're trying to figure out where we slot that building in, but this building is incredibly efficient as well. And that's one thing we'd like to do, hopefully within this school year, maybe even, if things change a little bit, we can get into do those readings. But again, it's a great achievement. It's a great thing we like to share with boards and your taxpayers to know you invested in these facilities and they're efficient and your kids are getting a great learning environment. So that Energy Star piece. On the next slide past that one, I just showed some of the buildings on there. I think there's 6 or 7, 6 potentially we could get certified for Energy Star. I listed these 4 because I wanted to show you the difference in the Energy Star score. And so the current score is the first number listed after the building. Score in parentheses is the increase from before we started. So at Lancaster, for example, it's an 84 score now, which means it's basically more efficient than 84% of the buildings in the United States. It was a 44 when we started pre-project. And that kind of goes, we went from 44 to 88. High school went up 35 points and the middle school 37 points. And you're still, we'll get into in a moment, there's still more work we can do and make these buildings even more efficient, get more energy savings. But I wanted you to see the impact of the project. That's a significant jump in Energy Star score, because it's a very competitive process, and you would assume that all the buildings in the United States are in that portfolio. They're not. I mean, the only people putting it in there for the most part are people that are doing things to make them more efficient. So it's like you're competing against the cream of the crop. You're going to a college entrance exam or law school exam. It's not like everybody's taking this score. So to be in the top percentile of those groups is really significant. There's a few states that require all their schools to be in portfolio manager, but for the most part, your buildings are really efficient, not yours, but school district buildings are really inefficient. They're probably not going to put them in the system. So it's not like you're beating those buildings that haven't done things to invest in their buildings. This is a really good achievement. And so hopefully we get a process to work towards that at some point. And the last slide last couple of slides I want to share with you is, again, in Kentucky, myself and different people on my staff do these kind of reports in 11 different states. Kentucky is the only state where board members and superintendents even know what EUI or have an idea what that stands for, or heard of energy use intensity. And it's really a tribute to where Kentucky schools have been for quite some time now as far as a statewide approach to energy efficiency. So in your district, when we started in 2014-15, your EUI was a 60. And the EUI basically is your energy per square foot. So it's BTUs or 1,000 BTUs per square foot. So you take your natural gas, your electric use, convert those things to BTUs, divided by 1,000 in the square footage, and you get that number. That 60 number would be considered an efficient building in most states we work in. They started in the 80s, 60s by efficient. We oftentimes get those buildings in the low 40s, high 30s, but that takes a significant investment in those buildings. For you guys to start at 60 is good nationally, but probably a little lower than average in Kentucky. I can't remember what the numbers were at that time, but it was the bottom half of Kentucky. So here we are in 2019-20, you're down 34%, your EUI is at 39.5, which is really a great number. Nationally, it's a fantastic number, and Kentucky has a really good number. Again, that means your energy use just per square foot is down over 34% in that 5-year period. And I know one time you used to get a ranking probably every year, I think, of where you sat on that. I don't think the state does that anymore. We've tried to keep track of that, try to keep that updated, but it really is not possible. We have the buildings we work in, which are
Yeah, the last full year they ranked them was fiscal year 2017. And at that time, the average EUI was in the high 40s, like 48 and 49 statewide. So you were definitely, higher use, energy use, lower than average, score. The higher the number, the less efficient. So it's kind of inverse. But And now you're better than what that average was a few years ago in the state. Quite a bit better, actually.
It's like we're paying golf here, you're below par now, it's getting better. And we're kind of under the assumption that number statewide is gonna start creeping up because people aren't focused on that and keeping the track of that and reporting that number naturally will go up. And we see it in every other state where that's not a focus, the number's higher. I mean, just the fact of that is. And people have new buildings, the new systems are buildings, which is how they operate it, that focus is just not there. And so we would be under the assumption that number's probably gonna go up in most places, and your number's trending in the right direction significantly. So I want to make sure you were aware of that as well.
Yeah, and just because a building's newer, it doesn't mean it's going to be efficient. I think the last meeting Mike and I attended, Mr. Woods expressed some frustration with the high school. They thought it was going to use less energy than what it was initially. And I think we've seen some improvement in the high school, haven't we, Mike?
Yeah.
But, that was a newer building. That was one of those examples where a new building doesn't necessarily represent an efficient or a low energy use building. So, and we see that quite often.
And the last thing I was going to mention, just so you're aware, I'm on this slide where it talks about performance assurance support and how my team works, and I'll turn it over to David and Bart to talk about a few other things. So we call it our customer portal. And so Brad Avey and your staff can go log in there and actually enter a work ticket or service ticket or support help from us. That goes right to our staff. There's also, that's a screen capture of the main login screen once he's on there. So there's training videos on how to operate the system and research and those kind of things. We call knowledge base, so as things are learned about your system, they'll be recorded there. So you can, oh yeah, I had that problem at that room at one point in time. How'd that work? And so we went through the first year, there were 70 tickets. These are warranty items or training needs or things that may have come up during that year, entered into the system. And so when a ticket goes into the system, so Brad enters that, it comes into our staff. Dustin is assigned to your account. It works for me, and Dustin will get that immediately to him, and he'll enter status or what he's seeing. And so every time, once it's assigned to Dustin, and then any change of state, Brad gets an email back to say, this is what's happening on that work ticket. And there's pretty simple things in there. Sometimes they get pretty complex. And so it's a great way for us to keep track of, you've got a problem, you've called somebody and it doesn't fall through the cracks. And a great way for you to know we're still working on that. And if we go in there and we correct an issue, we can write on there what we did to correct that. If you think it's correct and it's not, Brad can go back and open that up and say, yeah, you did that, but that didn't work. We still have more problems. And we have our system will automatically create those. So if you're 79 of those were automatically created by our analytics system. So we have things monitoring the controls that say something's not right here, and it'll give us a ticket to my staff that Brad may not even know about. Now he sees all those, so he probably got an email that this ticket was created, but it wasn't one that somebody on your staff created. Our staff created that, or the automation system created that to say something's running too long, or temperature's out of range, or something like that. So we get those as well. So that's kind of how we handle supporting the project moving forward. And that will stay open as long as we're monitoring the energy performance of the buildings. And so from now until it's a 10 or 20 year guarantee we have here, that'll be in place. You have an issue, you can email us or enter a ticket, and then we keep track of any issues that may arise during that time. So I just want to mention that so people are aware that's how we do that. Again, 68 of those have been resolved. We've got one that was just dated right before we did this report. We've got one ongoing issue that we're working on. And one thing before I was with the company, I was a customer. And one of the reasons I joined the company was, every project you do, things go wrong and something happens. I had one contractor that was there making sure we got fixed, and others I was calling and trying to get somebody out there. And so it's another thing we do as far as keeping track of those tickets. So we know they're there. If we have something that is ongoing, we have a company managers meeting once a month. I bring those up to say, we've got an ongoing issue at customer XYZ. We need to get more resources to get that fixed. Those are the kind of things that we do long-term to support you. And that's why I come here to this report so that somebody and my staff is watching every month. I think I mentioned last time, I've got an individual that part of his job is to get utility data, enter it into our software package. And he runs analytics every time he enters a monthly utility bill, so that if our analytics or something doesn't catch something not working right, he sends me an email to say, hey, this building is out of range compared to previous month and previous year. And so worst case scenario, we're a month behind catching something wrong. We believe our analytical system will pick that up, and I believe your staff will pick that up because they're very in tune to what's going on. But worst case scenario, we get a bill that's higher than what we expect. We catch it the first month and it's not 6 months down the road, and all of a sudden we're trying to figure out what happened. So with that being said, I know the last time you asked us about other additional opportunities we may have. I'll turn it over to David and Bart, and they can kind of talk about some other things that we've looked at that you can do as far as energy conservation. One of those being renewables and creating your own energy, so that you hedge those rate increases long term.
Thank you, Mike. Mr. Stoll, how are we doing on time?
I think we're fine.
We're good, okay. All right, so we're not gonna go through every page of this, but I just wanna give you a preview. We went ahead, since we already have access to utility information for the district and we have been in your buildings, our engineers and technicians along the way have come up with some ideas to potentially upgrade the building some more, save some energy, improve comfort and operation of the facilities. So I think Mr. Woods and Dr. Lamb asked about potentially taking a look at a phase 2 at some point. So we jumped the gun a little bit, but we also wanted to close the loop with you on what some potentials might be when you're ready to explore that further. What this sheet is on top is all of your buildings are listed at the top. And then the ideas of additional things we can do are in the first column. And then which building they apply to are the dots and the check marks and the green, yellow, and red. Now, what's the green mean? It means that it is going to pay for itself or better in those particular buildings. So that's what we call a savings driver. If it's yellow, it may or may not pay for itself. You know, based on budgetary numbers, it could or it might not. But we haven't actually come up with a defined scope and bid this out to contractors yet. So, and then if it's red, more than likely it's going to be a very, what we call a capital intensive or expensive item. It will generate some savings, but likely not enough to pay for itself. Now, I joined the company when the phase 1 was already under construction. So just to remind you, these projects have to self-fund with everything combined. So you take the things that are quick payback green items and combine them with yellow and reds, and you still get a project that works. So just because something's yellow or red doesn't mean that it's completely off the table, but you definitely may want to consider doing the green ones. But when you're ready to explore a phase 2, we're happy to come up with an actual audit report for you. So this is just a summary for you to look at. I'm happy to touch on any of these, going deeper. We do want to, I know renewables was mentioned before, and I agree with Mike. It's part of a solution for the future, but it may not be the solution currently. So the districts that we've talked to in Kentucky that are served by electric companies, like a rural electric cooperative, those tend to have higher electric rates where solar is more feasible. And if you look at the next page, a little packet, that's a solar summary. And actually page 2 of that shows what rates you're currently paying at Garrard County High School, Camp Dick, and Pink Lake Elementary Schools. And you'll see you're in the high 8s, low 9s on those buildings. And what we found is that if you pay more than 7 cents, that solar generally has a good payback. So we ran some initial numbers. If you want to flip back to the first page again, and we came up with some budgets. Now this is not going to offset 100% of the usage of these buildings. In Kentucky, you don't get, it's called net metering when you're able to spin the meter backwards and get credit on your bill for it. In Kentucky, there's limitations to that. So it doesn't make sense to pay for enough solar to actually spin the meter back, because you're really not going to get economic benefit out of that. So what we've tried to do is analyze your buildings and how much is the building going to use all the time? You know, what we call the base load of the building. So we're trying to offset what the building uses day in, day out. And then anything over and above that, the electric company would supply, you know, and supplement it. But we're offsetting some of the building's usage. And if you see the high school, the last column, about 62% is what we've sized this system for. the elementary school, Camp Dick 39%, and then Paint Lick 59%. So an average of about 55% for those buildings. The payback on these solar systems is really good. It's 14.2 years. And if you see the 20-year net savings, I'm kind of jumping around out here in the columns, but about midway on that chart, after paying for the bond repayment, you actually net savings on year one with these solar systems. And in the first 20 years, you save a net $123,000 with solar. So it's almost like signing up with a cheaper electric company that is supplying your electric with renewable energy. These are 40-year lifespan systems. So once the system's paid off in 20 years, if you look at the 30-year net savings, it jumps up significantly. You're netting almost $2 million worth of free energy for the district at that point. So over the next 10 years, it's about $200,000 a year in free energy that the district's getting. So it really, you take control of your utility costs. You know, you're not necessarily at the mercy of the utility company and their rate increases. And you're investing in the financial viability of the district long term when you go renewable. Plus you have all the other benefits, you know, the environmental benefits, the educational aspects, things like that. So that's just the back of the envelope, you know, budgetary. It looks like solar could work in Garrard County if it's something of interest. Now, one of the things we did was, and we reviewed this with Mr. Stoll a couple of weeks ago, was where would you put the panels? And if you flip a couple pages back, we've got some aerial photographs, starting with the high school. And my understanding, we originally had the solar panels closer to the high school, but my understanding was there's future plans for facilities around the high school. So did we put it in the right spot, Mr. Stoll, as far as?
I think when Brad and I spoke with you, it was that general area.
Okay, so there's some farmland back there towards the bus garage. It increased the price of the solar system a little bit because we got to trench it and put some transformers in to run it that far, but it can be done. So based on the size system we're talking about, that is to scale about how much land it would take for those solar arrays. And then likewise, on the following pages, you've got a picture of what a potential Camp Dick solar system would be, and then the Paint Lick as well. And we adjusted those locations based on feedback that we got as well.
And the exact location could be changed ultimately. It doesn't have to be exactly there, but that's an example of the location.
That's correct. And we installed solar at Covington up in northern Kentucky, and they are landlocked. So they actually put it on the roof, and here's just a brochure of their project. Now, while the roof doesn't take up land space, your roof has to be in good condition before you put the panels on it. And it also drives the cost of the installation up, so the economics are not as good on a roof now. So ideally, if you have land available, that's a better return on investment. And then here's some other solar installations we did. They don't have to be necessarily perfect rectangles or squares. We can fit them in whatever space you have available. But just on paper, it looks like, you know, solar viable in Garrard. So.
And at the time we were investigating the phase one, the first project, we did review the opportunity for solar. But in the time that has passed since we first were investigating that scope of work, solar economics have only improved. The efficiency of panels, the cost of panels, et cetera, which make it even more of a benefit to you all.
Plus utility rates have gone up, which helps on the other side. So I know it's a lot of information, but and I'll pause to answer the questions you might have initially. As far as the process, when you're ready to move forward, we're pre-qualified with the cooperatives, so you can elect to use a price contract method and just, you know, select us to go ahead and start developing a phase 2 for you. Probably looking at 3 to 4 months of walking the buildings, working with Brad, defining scope, bidding it out to contractors, and bringing you back a package that you can consider from the time that you want to get going. So, anyway, thank you for giving us the time. Yeah, we'd love to explore another project with you when you're ready.
Any questions from board members? Okay, thank you all.
Appreciate it. Extra.
The next item is to review the board agenda for the regular meeting on Thursday. You have a hard copy there if you want to use that. It's easier for you. If it's okay, Commissioner McCreary, I'll just start walking through. If you guys have questions, please don't hesitate. In the communications area, let's start there because item number 1 is the same as it always is. Communications area, we plan to do a recognition early on. I think I shared with each of you that we're going to be starting to recognize a teacher of the month each month. So we'll try to take advantage of that on Thursday. You had one SBDM minute collection to review, and we anticipate right now the potential of an audience comment. We're double checking that tomorrow. We'll let you know if any of that changes. And obviously, if you all have any communications that you want to share, you'll have an opportunity to do that. And then we also will be sharing new hires and resignations from the last board, since the last board meeting. So that'll be available to you. When we open the the KSBA site to you, once we publish it, we've left it closed right now in case we need to make an amendment of any kind to the agenda. All of those documents will be available to you there, so you can see those. I appreciate Dr. Lamb letting us explore with her on Friday where we had some glitches, so she was very helpful. I appreciate that. In reports, we will be adding a report there that is not currently in your agenda. It'd be based on Kevin's comment to us a few minutes ago that he feels like he'd be able to be here on Thursday afternoon to share with you the bid opening results. So we'll add that in and have that updated for you by Thursday. Then we'll have the treasurer's report, and Stacy's here tonight to share any information with you about that or answer any questions that you have. So let's just look at the treasurer's report right now, and then we'll get to the working budget after that. So any questions on the treasurer's report that she shared with you? For those of you that have your information from the other day, I believe it's tab 3. If you need to look back at that.
Did you want me to go over this or just if they have questions?
Either way, if they want it, it doesn't matter. If you want to walk through it, that's fine.
It's fine either way. Probably would be more helpful if you kind of give us a cover sheet of what it is and just go through it quickly.
Okay.
Then if we have any questions, we'll ask them at the moment.
Okay. Okay, so at the end of August, we're looking at an ending cash balance of 7.1 million. And when you compare that to where we were last year, we're up by about 1.8 million. And if you look down at the comparison where I compared the 2 years, you'll see that the general fund shows the largest increase, and that was due to the timing of payroll. This month, we had 1 payroll as compared to last year, we had 2, and that's all due to the timing of how the payroll hits. Also, this year, we moved the cost of our Chromebooks out of Fund 1, out of General Fund, into Fund 2, out of repairs money. So that takes up about 100,000, moves it out. Also noted in the comparison, we've included the student activity fund that wasn't included last year. And that was due to new legislation this year that requires us to report that at the district level instead of the school level. So that was about 300,000 there. There's also notable increases in the special revenue fund, which is due to the timing of the reimbursements. The construction fund is due to the transfers in to cover our current construction projects. And the food service fund, which we usually see an increase every year since we've become full CEP. So on the next two pages, I kind of broke it down by fund and gave you an overview by fund. So I'm just gonna hit on a couple of those highlights. The general fund has a net positive balance of $934,000. We transferred over $112,000 from the general to the district activity like we do at the first of every year. And that helps the schools with their athletics and their clubs. As mentioned earlier, student activity fund is now presented at the district level. We've received our first allocations in the capital outlay and building funds. We should have our final allocation usually in January. And then, let's see, we've got funds of about $400,000 that was transferred to the construction fund to cover those current projects we have that Mr. Chief talked about earlier. So that's just kind of overview of it, but I'm available for any questions.
So Stacy, if they have no questions on that, you want to walk them through the working budget?
Okay, I know Mr. Stoll went over with you last week about the working budget and the budget amendment. Basically, you don't typically see a budget amendment with the working budget, but that was a munis issue. The way that it was originally posted, it is not pulling into the working budget. So we're going to ask you to approve the working budget and the budget amendment in order to get all the amounts right. You've got several items to review. You've got your munis working budget, and that document has my notes on it that you should be able to flip through and hopefully answer any questions. You will have the budget amendment. You've got the general fund summary, which shows this year compared to the last two actual years. And you can tell by looking at that, that this year's working budget, we're only down about $15,000 from last year's an audited budget, and then about $55,000 to 2 years ago. So we've stayed about like the 3.2 million mark for the past 3 years, which I think is good, and we're still having a really good contingency. And then the last thing we have is the summary, which is for all funds. And it's about a 3-page document if you want to go through it real quick. It's showing that our general fund budget is approximately $26 million, with revenue expenditures of $23 million, leaving us projected ending balance of $3.2 million, and almost a 14% contingency. Revenue is comprised of 12% carryover, 23% local funds, 64% state funds, and 1% federal and other funds. Your expenditures in the general fund include 76% payroll, and the remainder is operating and carryover funds. We were able to absorb our 1% raise increase with the Bluegrass Family Health for our nurses. We can offset that cost. Again, our budget includes purchase of 2 buses, and then our Chromebooks, which were originally budgeted out of general fund, have been moved to Fund 2 with our CARES money. Our special revenue fund, or grants, that's approximately budgeted at $3 million, which is comprised of 6% local funds, 33% state grants, and 60% federal. And all grants have been budgeted in accordance with the state and federal guidelines. Our district activity fund is approximately budgeted $362,000, and these are school funds which are maintained at the district level. And then revenue includes our board allocations, along with any money that's collected at the schools and swept up. Our student activity fund is approximately $848,000, and these funds are maintained at the school for student activities. So each school has their own student activity account, but this year we have to report it with our money. So these funds have probably previously been accounted for separately in our audit report. So this year you're going to see it along with all of our other funds. Whereas used to last year and previous years, it was always in the back of the audit, so now it's gonna be pulled up front. Our capital outlay fund is approximately $237,000. And revenue is received from the state based on SIG allocations. And we've budgeted those to be transferred to the general fund and construction fund to cover certain expenditures, including the purchase of buses. We would cover that. Our building fund is approximately $3 million. Revenue is received from the state and local taxes. Funds cover debt service expenditures and approved construction projects. And then after we pay for everything out of our building fund, we're projected to have approximately $500,000 ending balance that we could use for other construction projects. The construction fund is for our current projects, there's approximately $500,000. And revenue is based on transfers, while expenditures are budgeted in accordance with the 3 PG1s. So whenever I was talking about our budget amendment was for the construction fund to pull in our current projects. The exterior doors at the middle school, the intercom system, and the CDR, that's cleaning. Our debt service fund is approximately $3.2 million. And revenue is received from transfers out of the general and building funds to pay debt service. And total debt service payments is approximately $3.2 million. The food service fund budget is approximately $2.8 million. Federal reimbursements are projected to be $1.5 million. And payroll-related expenditures are about 29% of expenditures, with the remainder to be spent on food and supplies and other needs at the school. The community education budget is approximately $7,500. And revenue is received for fees and is used to pay for classes offered. And then finally, we have our trust fund, which accounts for our income from beneficiary trusts, which is used to pay out scholarships. So that kind of covers all the different funds. And then, of course, you can look back at the working budget with my notes on it to look at each fund and the revenues and expenditures.
Thank you very much, Stacy.
You're welcome.
Very good.
Any questions for Stacy?
Is your handwriting?
It is. Can you read it?
Well, it took me a while to figure it out.
I'm sorry.
No, no, when you said amendment, I was trying to figure out what that one was. But I guess you meant amend your budget, right?
Yes, this sheet right here is the amendment that will pull in the construction of projects.
I figured that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Stacy. Appreciate it. Then we'll move into the consent agenda, and on the consent agenda, you'll have the minutes from the previous meetings in August, the treasurer's report that Stacy just went over, and that will be the extent of the consent agenda. Then we'll move into the action agenda, and we'll ask you to approve a return to in-person learning for those individuals who'd like to take advantage of it and who indicated initially that they were interested in coming back to school. Our hope is that you'll approve that. Our plan won't be drastically different than it was at the beginning of the year when we were planning to come. We've had a lot of conversation last week with schools that are in session and heard very positive comments from them. And one of the things that they stressed was whatever your plan is, make sure you adhere to it. So that's what we would be asking for, ask for an approval from you guys relative to that, so that we can return to in-person learning for those who are ready for it. And we'll still offer the option for those people who want to continue in the interactive distance. So folks would have available to them everything that they would want. As a side note to this, Chris has been doing some work and he pulled some final numbers for us today. And we have all 4.9% of our students have access in some fashion to the internet. So that was a good piece of information for us. That doesn't mean it will always be at the level we would want it to be. Doesn't mean it will always be consistent, but we do have opportunity here in the community for people to access that. So we continue to add additional pieces of support through our buses and the hotspots that we have to continue to support those. And we'll continue to do that through the rest of the interactive distance learning that we have for all students. So questions about that? We can
Is
go in.
is there an avenue for, and I'm sure there is, I'm asking probably a question you already have covered, but is there an avenue for those children that do not have access to make that aware to our people so that we can do what I know we would do is provide that access available to?
So every time that we receive an email that indicates there's a challenge, we ask those folks, or we make our principals at the schools aware of that so that they can not only wait for them to tell them, but so they can reach out. And then we've used support teams to contact every person that we can find that we're not able to get to on a regular basis. So we have people who are going out all the time looking for those individuals. So Mr. Bolin is here. He's done numerous visits to our kids out there who are not making connections. So once we are aware, or once we think we need to be aware of something, we are seeking those out. And I shared, I think, with some folks the other day, that we had some folks who were indicating that they had children and babysitters. All we needed to know is where the babysitter was, and we can try to get to them in that way. We're actually installing some of our hotspots on smaller vehicles so that we could go into specific locations as opposed to a larger location with the buses. So I think the answer to that is yes, we're trying every way we can to make sure that anybody who doesn't have access and that we're aware of, either directly from them or that we've been able to track through our system to find out that they're not connecting with us, that yes, we're trying to track that down.
I just want to be sure that we leave no stones unturned.
Yeah, I've had people contact me and say that, you know, they dropped out of a class and they tried to call the teacher to get back on and can't get hold of the teacher. I've told them to call the board office. And y'all, the board office, would put them in contact with somebody that could help them. I didn't know what else to tell them.
So I would tell anybody who had an issue with something like that to make a direct call to that school.
Well, that's what they tried to do.
Well, when you said teacher, I thought they were trying to go directly to the teacher. You're saying they couldn't get
Well, I guess
to
they
the
called,
school?
I guess they called the school. I don't know. They just said they tried to contact.
So anybody that can't get to somebody at the school, then that's good advice.
Well, tell
Send
them
it
to
to
call.
us and we'll track that down. Just like I was sharing with you all. If there's somebody who's emailing me about an issue that they're dealing with, we don't just respond to it on our own. We send it out to our schools to make sure that they can respond to it because they know those kids better than we do at the central office level. But somebody just needs to make sure that if they can't get through somewhere, that they contact us in some fashion, and we'll make sure there's a connection.
I don't know what the problem was. I met the new tech guy, Nick, the other day.
Uh-huh.
And he told me there's something in CDR. And he went out and he resolved whatever it was. I don't know exactly what it was, but I don't know if it had something to do with that or not.
Without the specifics, you wouldn't, but you gave them good advice. If they couldn't get through, they contact us, we'll make sure they get connected.
And we're getting better at it, you know, so the first few days of it, we did have some kids that were dropped out of sessions, like out of their meet sessions. And then when they would try to reconnect, when the teacher was, you know, the teacher would have to accept them back into the session. But if it was after it had already started and she's presenting off her screen, then she couldn't see that there was somebody trying to get in. And so now they've got, like, I've been to a few of the schools and they've got 2 different people logged in as a teacher on a couple screens, and that way one person can be on letting kids in if they get kicked out, and the other person can be presenting and talking to the kids. So it's kind of one of those things that we're getting better at it each day, but some of those things hit us that we didn't know, you know, when we first started. So it's like Mr. Stoll said, each day we'll get a little bit better, and that's what we're trying to make sure we do.
I've had some people today ask me, of course, you know, I've been inundated with people wanting to go back in person. And maybe some of you have too. I assume you did. And so I had some people today ask me if the teacher, and I told them I thought we were going to have dedicated teachers for those to do in person, that the teacher of an in-person class wouldn't have to deal with an online presence. Is that correct?
So all of our conversation leading up to the opportunity to return was with the understanding that what we were looking at was a teacher assigned for distance and a teacher assigned for in-person. We're going to have a conversation tomorrow with the high school to make sure that that aligns with what they need and the way that they're going to work. And so some of the stuff that we're working through is a continuation. And I shared in my Fast Friday that that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make any last minute adjustments that we need to in order to accommodate not only the needs of the kid, but the best way that we can provide the instruction from the teacher side as well. So tomorrow morning, we have a principals meeting, and I have a follow-up meeting with the high school to make sure that we have a good understanding of what works best for them. What we would ultimately say in that situation is if we need to shift in some fashion to do a better job to work with the kids, that's what we'll do. But our intention from the beginning was to have a teacher who was set up to work with those at distance, and the teachers set up to work with those in the building.
Mr. Stoll, you may have said this and I missed it, but do we have a date? What date do you anticipate?
So we'll finalize that recommendation tomorrow. So the governor's recommendation is over on the 25th of September. So it would be after the 25th of September. We've looked at 2 dates right now, and that's why I'll have a conversation with the leadership of schools tomorrow. We've looked at coming back on the 28th, which would be the first possible day that we could. And we've also looked at coming back on the 30th. The idea of the 30th was driven by how we have a regular calendar. If you think back to every calendar that you've seen, we normally come back on a Wednesday. And we even asked the kids when we did had a meeting with the kids to do a student advisory if they understood why we did it. And they were like, well, not really. We just thought you'd like to have a longer weekend before we came back, which is great to hear from kids, right? They tell you the truth about what's going on out there. And we had the opportunity then to explain to them that one of the reasons that you do that is to alleviate some of the tiredness that happens when you haven't been in school all summer and you come back for a full week. We've even had parents say that on day 2, the kids are just worn out, right? So take into consideration, these kids haven't been in school since March and what that might look like. So some of our staff, particularly Mr. Boland, challenged us to think about what that might look like, starting on a Wednesday and having a shorter week to allow them to adjust and give us the opportunity to also adjust along with it. But that's a conversation we'll have tomorrow. That's why you don't see a date yet. But we'll make sure that we have everybody on board for that. Okay. We'll ask you to approve the development of the District Facilities Planning Committee, and you'll be able to see what that looks like. The reason to do that is you all have indicated that you'd like to consider a waiver process rather than writing a new district facility plan, but we can't do that without a committee. So we'd ask you to develop the committee so the committee could review and potentially make the recommendation back to you all to request a waiver. Then you all can make the decision to request the waiver, and then we can forward that on to KDE. No promises from KDE that we get it, but that's the process that we have to go through. So we can't bypass that process and still get to a spot of asking that waiver.
Mr. Stoll, this is just from my own knowledge, but last year when we opted to do the waiver and not develop a new district facilities plan, I don't remember us having the requirement of developing a new committee. Can you explain the difference for me so that I understand that?
So I'm going to make my best guess since I wasn't here last year. But in my conversation with KDE, they indicated that we haven't requested a waiver from Garrard County in the last 8 years. So if the request didn't go to KDE, then you wouldn't have had a need for something like that. So the tracking of that happened at the KDE level. And so I can't give you a definitive answer, but that's the best I can give you. Item C will be the approval of the 2020-2021 contracts for non-resident pupils. So Mr. Boland is here tonight as the DPP. You have, I believe, 12 contracts with surrounding districts and districts that's been pressed out a little bit further. So if you have any questions, Mr. Boland, relative to those contracts, that's why he's here tonight. Mr. Boland, anything you want to share relative to those?
No, it's the same, just one-to-one with all the counties that are around us. We have the list of all the kids that's already on there from the previous year. So if you have any questions about that, ask me and I'll show you exactly what we got.
Well, I just want to say, I believe it's correct. We did originally when we went to the one-for-one, there were were some that were already on contract for years before, and
Yes,
they
sir.
were grandfathered in.
Yes, sir.
And it may be 4 or 5 kids from one family,
Yes.
and have those all moved on and moved out, and are not in that now?
Well, I'm not familiar with the exact one, but looking at the contracts, we only have one contract that has more than 1-to-1. And that's the one with Rock Castle with that one little piece of property.
That's the one.
Yeah, that's the only one that's above 1-to-1.
It should be working its way out too.
Hopefully, it's
Well, I
congratulations.
think we turned that over, or was it to Madison County that we adjusted those students?
The one I'm familiar with is Rock Castle. It's just at the end of Copper Creek, down there where it hooks around. Kind of a weird
Yes, it is. It's hard to get to.
geographical deal.
You can get lost really quickly
Yes,
trying to
sir.
find it.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, sir. Any other questions?
Then we'll ask you to consider approving our request to seek emergency certification for 2 of our individuals. One at the middle school, which is a typical request of an emergency certification, and then one from the high school. And I would suggest to you that the one at the high school is atypical, and that it's more like an apprenticeship. That teacher currently holds full certification and can teach everything in their content area save this. If we have them teach the one section that the high school has for this, they'll earn enough points so that by the end of the year, they would actually have that certification. So it's a way for us to get us a fully certified teacher through that spot. So it's a pretty nice move for us. Ms. Perry is here. If you have any questions for her relative to the process that we're going through here and how we're doing this, she's more than happy to help walk you through it.
Is this someone who we expect to stay with us
Out of the high school?
at the high school?
Yes. She's been with us for several years, and she teaches a full schedule. But this year she was able, we're giving her one section of physics. And as Mr. Stoll said, as long as we allow her to teach that section of physics this year with us, and she has to attend 2 professional development sessions geared towards physics also, and combining that with all the classes that she's already had in her background, that will make her a highly qualified teacher in physics, and she'll have full certification for that, in addition to all of her other certification next year. So that's pretty exciting. And then the other one is she has completed, she's teaching 7th grade ELA, and she has completed her K through 6 teaching all of her courses for K through 6, but she doesn't have 7th grade ELA certification, and she has one test left to take for her K through 6 certification. But she's teaching for us this year in that, and she's also coaching. So she's she's definitely bought into our school system and is excited about being with us. I'm not sure if she will want to be a middle school teacher forever, or if after this year she will decide to, to do what she had originally planned and be a K through 6 person. But for this year, we'd like to emergency certify her. And she's off to a great start. Right now, she's working as a long-term sub for us, and she's doing a really good job. And I will say, you all had originally given us permission to emergency certify our Spanish teacher, if you remember, from the high school. And we didn't end up needing to emergency certify her because she is she's in a Spanish program now at Eastern, and so she's a fully certified teacher in an Option 6 program now. So that was one less emergency certified. So right now we just have one emergency certified that is in place in math at the high school. And she's going to be going into a program next year also. She's taking her courses, and then we would like to do our middle school ELA and then that one course for our high school physics. So we're pretty happy with the people that we've been able to get it.
Any other questions? And then the last thing we'll ask is for you to approve the working budget with the amendment that Stacy has shared. We did not think that it was appropriate for it to be in the consent agenda, so we pulled it out so you can handle it separately since it has the amendment to it. Okay,
Sounds good.
and then we'll recommend adjournment.
I'll take a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Made by
Second.
Mr. Hurd, seconded by Mr. Kraft. We are adjourned. Good work.